Okay, so I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey with a really interesting story that's unfolding in Australia at the moment, in Tasmania, where I'm from. I would also like to acknowledge a long list of co-authors on this work as well. So in Tasmania, like Australia is a country that really likes recreational fishing. So we have about just over 500,000 people living in Tasmania, and about 130,000 of them fish, so up around 27%. We have a diverse range of fish that we can catch in Tasmania, but we have, if you look at the top here, one that stands out a mile, almost an order of magnitude more, and that's the sand flathead, which is a platycephalus species. So we estimate that about 70,000 of those 130,000 fishes are actually catching this species at least once a year. And that species, as I said, it represents about 50% of the total finfish catch in the state. And we're up around, the last survey, about 128 tonnes. Now, this is probably the really unique bit to me, is if we look, we've been doing statewide surveys every 5 years, going back to 2000, and there was and commercial records go back, that we have to about 1995. And you can see the blue dots here up the top, that's the recreational harvest. So it was up around 300 tonne, and then we've seen a decline. And if you look at that relative to the commercial harvest, this is a recreationally dominated marine species by a long way. 98% of all the harvest is from the recreational sector. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I don't know too many cases of a recreational species that has been fished to depletion in the marine space. Again, I was trying to come up with a catchy title for this slide, and I've gone the aquatic tragedy of the commons for fisheries version 2.0. We all know the tragedy of the commons, and there's plenty of fish in the sea, and we can never harvest them down to a point, and then we learnt in the mid-20th century that, well, that's not actually true, you can. And I think we're starting to see now, and there's more papers coming up with this as well, particularly in coastal environments and depending on what the species is, recreational fishing can have an effect. As we said, there's 70,000 people catching these fish every year for generations. This is the bread and butter species in Tasmania. So here is Tasmania. We have a whole range of regions. Obviously, red is not good, green is good. Green is the top right there, that island, Flinders Island, with the two boxes around it. So quite a remote area with very low fishing pressure because it's just hard to access. Okay, so that's what we're seeing with the biological science. We do that with fishery independent surveys. But in 2023, we also went out and did a very detailed survey of sand flathead fishes. It was a respondent-driven survey. You ask any social scientist how long should your survey be, they will have kittens when I tell them there was over 100 questions and it took 50 minutes to do. But the fact that this was such a passionate topic for the anglers, we got almost 1,500 responses. We got a very good response rate. What's positive is, well, not positive, but from my perspective validates the biological work we're doing, is that the fishes are seeing the same thing. So you can see across all these regions, and this trend actually fitted our analysis when we looked at it biologically from the regions. Most of them are saying that their perception of the status of the stock is very poor or poor, particularly those ones down in the southeast there. Those bottom four are all in the southeast, which is around the capital, so where all the fishing ever happens. Now, and as often happens with fisheries management, over subsequent years, things have been ratcheted down, death by 1,000 cuts, as they like to call it in Australia. But we've got to the point where we've now moved to depletion. Again, commercial, as I said, was a low catch, and this is interesting, we come back to the conclusions. It was a very low catch, but they actually closed the commercial fishery as well, and that was because there was a perception that commercial fishing may be having an issue, so they actually closed it. One of the survey questions we asked was, do you agree or disagree with the following question, which is swift and appropriate management measures to ensure the fishery is managed sustainably is important for recreational fishers? 84% said yes. So they see the issue and they want a solution. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If you go online in Tasmania at the moment and look at the Facebook chatter back and forward, there is polarised views here. Some people are going, yep, there's a massive problem. Others are going, I can still catch a big fish. Scientists don't know how to catch fish. They're hopeless fishers like Christian. They shouldn't be doing the fishery independent surveys. So we are in a position where we need to sort of now educate people to understand that there is a problem, and how do we get to do that. Part of that is understanding, as we've heard several talks today, understanding how they see the world. So what we did in this survey was we actually started to look at the diversity through the segmentation analysis. We've heard a couple of presentations. We looked at the basic demographics, then eudaimonic profiling, which I'll come back to, fishing motivation, consumption orientation, and the last one's an interesting one in Tassie, or in Australia, motivation by fishing modality. So we're not just anglers. We have potters, we have netters, we have divers, and we have people that invest a lot of money going offshore and others that are shore-based. So we actually wanted to look at the motivations by that fishing modality. This one's for you, Gerard. I put this in. We've done partitional clustering using PAN, and we can talk about it later.
Okay.
But our statisticians were happy, but I really want to have a chat to you about it. All right, so we'll quickly run through some results. No real surprises here. We know that most recreational fisheries tend to be male-dominated. This particular, we got a lot of responses between 30 and 74 years. Keep in mind this is respondents, it's a respondent-driven, so it's not necessarily representing the population. But these are the people that cared enough to do an hour-long survey. We asked about education, so above year 12, so that's going through potentially onto uni, year 10 or above, year 9 or below. We also asked country of birth because that is a big thing in Australia. We have a very diverse cultural community. This was maybe a limitation of the survey. Doing it going forward, I'd probably have it translated into some different languages because pretty much everyone that responded was Australian. We then looked at the behavioural segmentation, particularly around fishing. So again, fairly common. Got avidity, bit of a mixed bag. Not surprisingly, we've got a lot of avid fishers because they're the ones that are passionate about the fishery. Years fishing seems unusually high, but apparently everyone's got years of experience. Centrality, we asked relative to other hobbies. So again, 83% of people, recreational fishing is important, but because we really wanted to start honing in on sand flathead, the species of interest, and as I said, we've got a very diversified brack fishery, is how important is sand flathead to compared to other species. So 77% had a positive response to that. Again, not surprising. We see that in the catch data, and we saw it in the responses to how they felt about the stock. All right, so this is where we start to go a bit deeper and get into the fuzzies of human dimensions. Again, I will preface this that I'm not a social scientist, so I apologise to all the social scientists in the room. Eudaimonic profiling is sort of understanding at a higher level where you sit in terms of propensity for pro-environmental behaviours and understanding kind of some of your deeper values. The main components are biospheric, which is you're about the earth and the environment. Egoistic is basically you're an egotist to some degree, and an altruistic, it's about you're there for other people in the community. So you look at some of the questions, egoistic, things like leading the trip, competitive, influence, friends. So it's not necessarily a negative term, it's a personality trait. Altruistic is you're there, you want to be the one that's making sure all your friends catch fish. Biospheric is that you're enjoying getting out into nature. Now what we wanted to do here is, we've got 1,400 respondents. How do we put them into common groups? Because you can't sort of deal with 1,400 individual responses. So this is where that clustering methodology comes in. The black dotted line is kind of the average for the entire population. And then with the clustering methodology, it creates a different number of clusters. The model defines that 4 was sufficient to capture the variation here. And then we have to come up with some labels. So we've got the easygoing fishers, balanced fishers, which are close to the norm, collaborators, which tend to be a bit more about the altruistic, and then the influencers that tend to be a bit more about the egoistic. Fishing motivation profiles. So again, these are the classic questions that usually get asked around, is it catch related or non-catch related? And this was the interesting one about looking at the motivation intersecting with modality. So we've got game fishing, so that's things like tuna and offshore fishing, dive harvest, freshwater fishing, inshore fishing, which is coastal and deep water, offshore, and potting. So the most common was inshore fishing, so they're the people that would be targeting flathead. That's where flathead happens, fairly unique. Tassie has a real thing for potting as well, and they'll often take out their lobster pot, throw it out in the water as they're going out fishing for the day and pick it up on the way back. We've got generalists that do a bit of everything. Marine line fishers, they tend not to do freshwater. Inshore and freshwater, they're sort of like that coastal inshore lighter fishing gear. Marine generalists, and then inshore fishers divers is quite an interesting one. So these are people that spend time under the water, so they actually see impact firsthand. We also then wanted to break it back down, as I said, this was a sand flathead study, to look at harvest orientation and recreation orientation, because this is a big thing they talk about, you know, I can't go and catch a feed versus I can't go and spend time with my family. So this one actually drew out very strongly, two very distinct groups. Right, so don't worry too much about all these, what the questions are at the top. So this was a range of questions we asked around management settings, similar to what Gerard's just shown, you know, different management options, and also concepts on the fishery. But you can see down here, yellow and green are significantly different. So it's showing basically how diverse the views are, both across the demographics, but also through some of these clusters we've put together, particularly that last one, the recreation versus harvest. You know, they had significantly different views on pretty much everything. All right, so if we look at some of those specifically, I've only got a couple here. How do you feel the sand flathead stock is doing? You can see there's a couple of differences there in terms of avidity. Over here, again, that recreation versus harvest orientated. It's interesting what's driving that. Are they potentially worried that if they're acknowledging that there's a problem, there's going to be a closure? That's the people that, you know, harvest and rely on it potentially for some level of food, and also the motivations here through the fishing profile. So the casual and leisure anglers tend to think it's in a worse place than those that are fishing a little bit more. And just to round out, this is where it gets even more interesting. If you think back to that first slide where I had the recreational catch versus the commercial catch, this is where this stuff becomes really useful, is in education programs. We can see here that basically the question of what do you think the impact of commercial fishing is on this stock, across the board, everyone thinks it's commercial fishing, even though we've quite clearly shown that it's not. And this is that thing that people perceive, we're taught this, that industrial fishing is the thing that impacts fish. It's not us. So we've got a lot of work to do across the board here to help educate this fishery that there are some bigger issues going on here with recreational impacts. All right, take homes, recreational fishers are a diverse group. Duh, I think everyone knows that. Understanding people is at least as important as understanding the fish. I've heard that several times at this conference, and I think it's becoming more important that we are starting to really look into that deeply, and I think some of these talks that I've been saying at this conference would suggest that's happening. Understanding the typographic groups, understand the norms, values and behaviours and aspirations of a very diverse group, and then we can use that to look at targeted education on research and management, and my talk on Thursday goes a bit deeper into that. And basically this is all about improving literacy, so better the acceptance of science and management equals a better outcome for all.